This is a Revox A77 Mark IV reel-to-reel tape recorder. I've removed the front panel and the case from the unit. It belongs to the SPARC Museum, and one of the directors had been using this to listen to some tapes a few weeks back, and he said that the take-up reel became jammed, or it started to hesitate and resulted in tape spillage. Because the tape kept feeding through the capstan and the take-up reel wasn't taking it up. So he suspected there might be a seized bearing or something like that in the take-up motor. This design has two reel motors and also a separate capstan motor. And I've removed this motor, cleaned the bearings, put them all back, inspected them. Everything looked fine. The bearings were running free, they were well lubricated. There's nothing binding, no dust or anything in the between the stator and the rotor. So I'm not quite sure what's going on. Anyway, so I've left the front of the unit off. It's running at the moment. You can see the capstan rotating there. Capstan motor's working fine, nice and quiet. I've cleaned it up a little bit. The chassis was a bit dirty. I last worked on this particular recorder about, I don't know, 8 years ago. I think it was 2014, something like that. I replaced the motor run capacitors and some of the suppressor capacitors. And look in the back there, you might be able to see them. The motor run capacitors are the sort of cylindrical objects, which are these guys here. And the suppressor capacitor are these green rectangular capacitors there. There's a couple on that board and there's one on the board over there. They're usually reefer capacitors, which on this particular recorder, one of them blew up when I was using it back in 2014, hence the work I did on the machine back then. Otherwise, it's all original. None of the circuit boards, which are all plug-in boards in the base of the unit, none of them has been recapped. Quite often the tantalum capacitors go on those. Seemed to be okay in this unit at the time. I haven't used it since. It has been used at the SPARC Museum a few times. It's been working fine for the last few years until a few weeks ago. So I put an old scratch tape in there. The tape's older than the machine. The tape's probably from the 1950s. It was last used on a Ferrograph Series 3 I worked on a few weeks back for a friend. I don't know what's on the tape, and I've got no amplifier plugged into this recorder. Actually, this is an unusual version of the Mark IV. It's got the Dolby noise reduction circuit boards in there, and an extra couple of switches on the front panel. There's a filter switch and a Dolby in and out switch, which is very unusual. Okay, so let's try it, see if it's actually running. That seems okay. There's no noises coming from the motors. Just a little bit of noise as the tape's catching the edge of the reel slightly there. I did notice that the assembly between the platter and the motor shaft isn't exactly as per the manual. I didn't disassemble the other one to check that, but I suspect that this has been out before. I also noticed that the cover on the front bearing had a dent in it. Well, I straightened it out and I put it back onto the bearing. Whether or not that was causing a problem, I don't know. I couldn't see how it could, but again, it would indicate that this motor's been disassembled at some point and probably not been reassembled correctly. The actual parts in there aren't exactly as per the manual either, so I'm not quite sure if it's correct or not. I've got an A77 as well, which is in this room, but it's a Mark I, and I had a similar issue when I restored that about a decade ago. The motors in mine had all been worked on, and they weren't exactly per the drawings. I'll just briefly run around and show that recorder. It looks almost the same, except it's the older style. This is one of the original A77 units with the aluminum front panel, fully restored, works great. So what I plan to do is leave this running for a few, as long as it takes, a few hours, and see if anything happens with the take-up spool. I'll report back later.